Hi, I am Marina Molarsky-Beck, and I'm a third-year PhD in Yale's History of Art department, and I'm here welcoming you to a conversation between four recent MFA graduates from Yale's sculpture program in association with the exhibition at M23, in which all of their work is showcased, which is a kind of quasi-thesis exhibition that somewhat takes the place of the thesis exhibition that would have been held were it not for COVID interrupting everything. And we are going to be talking about their work in relationship to the theme, which is Vanishing Point, which all of the artists have thought about a bit already in relationship to their work, and that loosely groups these four very disparate practices. And so I would like to introduce the four artists here with me today: Efrat Lipkin, Sam Shoemaker, David Roy, and Peyton Peyton. So thank you all so much for being here with me and talking about your work. I wanted to begin with the theme of Vanishing Point, which I think is an extremely rich and generative one, and start by thinking about how, in linear perspective, the vanishing point delimits the visual field. It's this point of convergence for orthogonal lines that meet on one imaginary unchanging horizon line. And I have thought about this concept a little bit in relationship to an essay that Hito Styrel wrote called In Free Fall. I don't know if any of you have read it, but it's not necessary in any way to have done so, but it discusses the way in which systems of perspective serve to orient the viewer in relationship to that horizon. And she notes that the reverse is also true. She says, with the loss of horizon also comes a stable paradigm of orientation, which has situated concepts of subject and object, of time and space throughout modernity. So I wanted to just open by thinking about how each of you understands the vanishing point and maybe what it means in relationship to your work specifically. And perhaps we could think about how the vanishing point, as you conceive of it, might seek to orient or disorient viewers or you as an artist.
Maria, could I ask, would you mind reading that Hito quote one more time?
Yeah, of course. With the loss of horizon also comes the departure of a stable paradigm of orientation, which has situated concepts of subject and object, of time and space throughout modernity. So in the essay, this quote is sort of setting up this idea that in the kind of Renaissance system of perspective, there is this very stable notion of space, which is a sort of abstract and constructed one, based around the horizon and the vanishing point as the sort of center of that system. And it's a means of creating a rational worldview, which is a sort of fictionalized one. It's allowing you to represent space in the case of painting and drawing on a two-dimensional surface in a way that's illusionistic and conforming to a set of rules. And then she goes on to talk about how artists since then, sort of beginning in the 19th century and towards the present, have sort of subverted that system, and argues that now we have kind of abandoned the old regime of perspective and the kind of rationality of having a situation as a viewer who is oriented in a specific position related to a specific visual field. And that's why the essay is called In Free Fall, that there's this kind of sense of no horizon, no stability, no orientation. But I am curious to know how you all conceive of the concept of vanishing point and what it means in your work.
Well, for me, it's like And I think about like when my rockets fly and they go, I mean, based on like the size and atmospheric condition, everything, they reach a point where you can no longer see them like with your unaided eye, and they basically just vanish. And then at that point, like I'm just relying on data basically to like know where this thing is. And it's like, yeah, like when it's out in the vast like desert, like you can't, and it's like behind some, like it landed like behind some like bushes or something, you can't see it at all. And like it's basically vanished. So that's like the vanishing point for me. Like that was like the first like thing that made me like think of this theme for the talk. Like it's something I was interested in. And I mean also just like I always like talk about motorcycles and stuff. I'm sorry, but like it's really interesting to me, like when I'm riding like down the highway or something, and you do get like that kind of like Renaissance. I mean, you're going on like a long stretch of highway out in the desert, and you do get like that really like classic like Renaissance type perspective of vanishing point. But you're always like as like a motorcyclist, because I mean at 60 miles an hour you're covering, I don't know what they say, like a football field a second or something. I forget what the exact thing. It's a mile a minute or something. But you're always looking towards that vanishing point, or like the farthest point you can see, to try to gain some information so you can like continue to ride safely. Like you're not gonna like hit something. You're always like looking, you're always like reaching for that point of like the last point you can get information from. So that's like, I don't know, that's like what I think about when I think about vanishing point. And I hope that like some of my work kind of it kind of operates beyond like the visual too. I see the vantage point as like being like beyond the visual. So yeah, like it just makes me think about what I can do to like manipulate things that are happening beyond the visual, or just like be like cognizant of those type of things in my work.
Yeah, that's interesting to me, David, because I was thinking as you were talking about, yeah, how a road, especially like a paved highway, creates, as you were saying, this strong sense that there is a like a perspectival system with the road moving towards the horizon, and how we might think of the horizon as this like immutable thing that's always there in the world, but man-made structures like roads and architecture can like create an even more sort of intense feeling of perspective. But then in your video, when the rocket is in the air, you lose that sense of like the groundedness of space, and you're just like literally up above the horizon. And I do think there is a kind of like disorientation produced by looking at any object like a rocket that's not physically attached to the ground.
Yeah, it's like it's interesting to me, like again thinking about disorientation and like shifts in perspective. Again, you know, I'll talk about motorcycling, but like it's really easy to tell the difference. I mean, I started like riding bicycles before, and it's really like easy when you're in traffic to tell the difference between a car that's going like 10 miles an hour and 40 miles an hour. But to like tell the difference between a car that's going like 60 miles an hour and 100 miles an hour, it's really hard to judge that. And just like that weird like shifting perspective that like I mean, because you know, you're just like a monkey on a thing with like two wheels and like an engine that goes like super fast. And like your brain, like the evolution of your brain, it's not designed to like judge like those speeds and stuff. So it's like, yeah, like that difference in like perspective that you get and like the shifting, that's really interesting to me.
I think I really relate to David in sort of thinking between like something that's very grounded in an experience, like physically here, physically functioning in some way, and then the vanishing point being this trajectory that it's going on and we can't really see. And for me, that space is sort of where imagination kicks in. And so sort of, I feel like David and I engineer in very different ways. He like actually engineers and I like imagine that I do.
Oh, that's real, man.
Yeah.
That glass antenna, man, that's real. Like that was some real engineering.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've had like our works compared formally in very interesting ways. I feel like because of that, because we are like both really wanting to ground what we're doing in this like in ways that work in a very specific way, right? That it has like an aim and it works in that way. And then there's meaning and something functioning in a specific way. So like for me, having a connection to the floor that's like actual suction cup that works, and that sort of force, it's what's holding everything down. So it's a sort of a formal take on that, but then also the trajectory of that being how does that sort of, what's in the underbelly of that suction cup, right? And what can sort of seep into the floor through that connection. My imaginings that within the system I create that has these like really real functions, also something else happens with the space, so that these forms are sort of root into the floor in this way, and send these trajectories in, and the same happening upwards with these bells of trumpets and glass spears sending information in form of like sound and color, and in a way that feels like you really feel like you're looking towards a vanishing point, but you also feel this like energy movement or connectivity. Yeah, so I feel like moving between grounding, functioning things in a space, and then these imaginary trajectories as sort of a way to ask how far of a reach these forms can have, and how they can sort of shift both our experience in the actual space, but also thoughts about like experiences of space in general. Or systems at work in general, right, that we encounter and are grounding us in the everyday.
Yeah, everything is very uncertain right now. My partner and many people around me have been forced to evacuate their homes in California, what's now being called the second largest fire in California's history, and they don't have enough prison labor to put these fires out, which is like troubling on many levels. And so, you know, many people around me might not have a home to go back to, you know, in a few days. We have this pandemic, and we see a lot of the institutions around us falling apart, and everything is kind of open to being rewritten, and nothing is really certain. There's no stable kind of like horizon line or vanishing point, as you're talking about from the Hito text. For me, mycology has been a place that I find really rich, where I think a lot of kind of new ideas are circulating and forming, and I think that field really aids itself to artists and kind of self-taught citizen scientists and people who aren't like always fully supported and recognized by like our big institutions, because this is a very new field, and a lot of things haven't really been tested. I mean, really, people are kind of shooting in the dark with a lot of the work that's being done now. And I think there's also a lot of kind of metaphors of the mushroom and fungi to the situation that we're in now that I think make a lot of sense. So in Anna Singh's very popular Mushroom at the End of the World book, she talks about the Matsutake mushroom, which is this prized several $100 You know, like a good specimen can be very, very expensive, and this like traditional gift that is like given to somebody after a business promotion. But this mushroom only really grows under like conditions of like great disturbance. So like famously, this was recorded to be the first thing to grow after like the bombing of Hiroshima, this like, you know, terrible like disaster of an epic scale, and it follows the path of deforestation and fire. So she kind of paints this mushroom as this metaphor of like the kind of life after the collapse. I think, you know, this gets kind of convoluted, but like life, she calls it the life after like post-capitalist ruins. So this like mushroom that like is such an opportunist to the chaos and like upheaval and tragedy of things, that is able to like rebuild community and the people that harvest it, and this life that can thrive under like such unstable ground. For me, that's what kind of gets me up in the morning and keeps me like in the studio and looking at things. And then I have like reasons for why that ties into my artwork, but I'm gonna take a step back because this is getting a bit wordy.
And that's really interesting about the mushroom that comes in right after the chaos. When I was thinking about vanishing points, I was thinking a lot about what leads up to vanishing points and kind of like spectrums of color and width and sound for, you know, my work specifically. And also just like this, I mean, we're in a time right now where the vanishing point, I think, of what we know or what, you know, a future that we're able to project into is suddenly like very up close. And not only that, but I mean, more and more, everyone's kind of willing to admit it. Like everyone's kind of saying that they don't know. And for the first time, I feel like that is kind of a comfortable conversation, or not comfortable, but it's like an acceptable, like it's not as uncertain or like scary to say that you don't know right now, because nobody knows. But in, you know, in my practice, I was, you know, starting with vanishing points, I was first thinking like kind of the moment when you wake up after a dream, and it's like that moment you're like closest to the dream that you ever were, and you just digested it and it digested you, and now every second that passes it's like slipping away. And also just like even in the body, like going between states of fight and flight and freeze, and kind of like the moment where like one state where your like body is okay, like kind of that ends and then it becomes something else, but that like turn where it's happening and kind of you don't really know where you're going. And also like with the piece that I was making for my thesis, with that, the vanishing point was like this constant mismatch of like I would have a plan, and then I would be working, and then I would turn around and my plan is not really here anymore, but now there's a new plan, and then I get somewhere else, and then I turn around and that plan's now gone. And this kind of like constant shifting of like reorienting, and then just total like loss of a line, and how that plays out really. Yeah.
If you don't mind, can I go back to David's like metaphor of like the driving into the horizon? I know that there's a lot of just sadness right now with artists, and like we ended grad school in Yale on a very sad note, and there's a lot of healing and mourning happening now. But I also, maybe I'm like overly optimistic and like the liberating capacity of art, but I also think that there's a part of me that thinks that artists are going to kind of rise to the occasion. Not that we're going to solve the world's problems, but I think artists are people that can kind of follow that which like doesn't yet have a form, that kind of like seeking that which like doesn't really have a question or answer. And these are like, all of us are not, like most of us have never had like really like stable income or like a sense of stability. Like it's always a moving goalpost, and I think artists can kind of think on their feet and kind of work through the trouble and like uncertainty of some of the stuff that is happening in the world. And I think a lot of things are like still unclear about the next like few years, but I think if the institutions change and things, I'm still optimistic that artists can make like of the situation that we're in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, maybe there's some way in which this theme of Vanishing Point also alludes to a notion of what's kind of beyond the currently imaginable or beyond what's currently visible. And it certainly seems like this is a moment where we're all having to contend with like the horizon dropping out, the set of rules we thought we were playing by no longer pertaining to anyone. And it seems to affect everything and everyone, but it's, I think, an especially interesting time to be thinking about, yeah, what art can do and the place that art can play in society.
You know, it can be entertainment, like if nothing else. I mean, people need to stay occupied. So, but yeah, I also agree. I hope it can do more, you know.
Yeah, even the purpose of what we do is still unclear. There's so many conversations about conversations, and like where art belongs, how we're supposed to spend our time in the studio. These things are never really clear to anyone around me, and I certainly like struggle with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that like art is just like living a free life, you know, and like doing what you want to do. I think that's like where all of us are artists, because like we want to like do things the way we want to do them. We want to be like free just to like live our lives the way that we do. And like, yeah, I mean, there's like precarity and all that, but like, I mean, I've had like some super amazing, like interesting like jobs and all kinds of like super cool people. Like I wouldn't I wouldn't trade that for anything. So like for me, I think, yeah, it's like, I guess like Joseph Beuys said that like that art is the science of freedom or something. But yeah, I totally believe that it's like just being an artist, especially like right now, it's just like, yeah, like living your like best, like freest life. I mean, I think that's like what's most important right now.
I think
Yeah.
even in terms of, sorry, even in terms of like what we actually make, there's a sense, you were saying something about the rules set out being sort of unclear right now, but I think there's something to setting out other rules constantly. So sort of not accepting, and I think like looking at all of our work, there is an interest in like thinking about material in a different way, thinking about systems in a different way, thinking about the way a room works, a body works, in these really like challenged set of rules. And in that way, it's like not a surprise that the rules that are set out don't work. Like we've been we're kind of already there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I was drawn to one of the key words that you all kind of assembled around this theme, one of which was systems, which I thought you just mentioned, and I was interested to hear all of you speak a bit about the different kind of systems that are at play in your work, because I think it's one of these great terms that has a lot of different meanings. There is this way in which every body of work is its own kind of system, which it may have a kind of set of rules delineating what the work is and what governs it, how it exists in space, what kind of form it takes, that it has its own kind of logic or system. And then a lot of your work is engaging with other kind of natural and scientific systems, bodily systems like the digestive tract, or systems larger than the human body like the solar system. So I would be curious to hear you speak about the systems that are at work in your practice, and how are you bringing them in, or why are these systems kind of interesting to you or engaging?
I'll say like one of the systems that I try not to like create too many of my own systems. Like, I don't know, except maybe Black NASA, but like I think the system like I'm dealing with the most is just like physics. I think like because like my rockets, like, you know, I want them to work and to like it, to be like, you know, like aesthetic and like nice, but also to really function and to be like really high performance, like serious rockets. So I'm always like, it's like a razor thin line between like sculpture and functional rocket, you know, or like aerodynamics. Like sculpture will come up against like aerodynamics or physics or materials or something. Yeah, that's like one system I deal with a lot, or like the most. And then maybe systems in like music, like systems of like sequencing and rhythm or acoustics. Again, maybe that goes also back to physics. But yeah, that's a little bit like what like the systems I deal with.
What's the order?
Go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot about this term. I think it was one of the things I was drawn to the most. And for me, there are existing systems that I'm definitely looking at. So like architecture, I think a lot about like my connections to spaces, and this sort of fight, like give and take that I have with the space that I work in. Where in this particular work, I actually feel like I moved back from that a bit. But that's sort of one. I think another one I was thinking about here was sort of systems of history and how that comes about in archaeology and like findings, and these artifacts, and how they function at one moment, how they can function now, and what sort of memory they have within like a larger scope. But I think the way I mostly think about systems is actually in this way of invention. So sort of coming back to this idea of like a set of rules, just deciding on my own set of rules, and they have to do with rules that exist in the world, but they're not really representative of that, I feel. And there's always this, like a lot of my starting points are thinking about setting up this a certain system that I imagine to work in a certain way. So though I started this piece thinking about a mound and layering and digging and like thinking about something that builds over time, what ends up happening is I find these ways in which I think of connectivity, like the way energy moves through things and sound moves through these pieces, and the way air moves through the pieces, stays in certain places, is pressured in certain places. And to me, that's how sort of the piece works as a whole. It's sort of the moment where the parts become one, and it's sort of the source and also the end of it. Yeah, and I think taking from that, it also is like a changing thing. So now thinking about the piece I'm showing, I'm thinking about how those parts could be reformed into a new system, or what sort of one function of them that was used in one way in this installation could be used in another. So I'm really interested in this idea of like traveling parts that move between systems. Yeah, I think that's sort of the way I relate to that idea. I think if I missed something, yeah.
If I'm being honest, I find the word system to be tricky. It can be a very slippery art speak word that we throw around, where like system can be, you know, the actual like system of how a rocket works or how the rocket is made. It's the process of, you know, making something. I guess I like this, and I'm not that I'm above that. I use this word as well, but it's like one of those words, structure, of like that can mean a million things, or event. But I think between the four of us, there is a idea of multiplicity in the way that we approach installation and practice, where for me, like mushrooms, there is a system, there's sort of a collaboration with these other organisms that require a system of climate control, of moisture, and of right oxygen exchange, of certain nutrients, that there is sort of a cycle, and it's not frozen in time as a painting or static object or autonomous object. It belongs to a space. It belongs to a history of cultivation and of citizen science. And I think similar definitions can belong to the four of us, not to speak for you, but none of us really make autonomous objects that can just sit in any room. And that's not terribly unique for contemporary art, but I think that is something that is really prevalent with the people in this conversation right now.
Yeah, I feel like when I am starting, similar to like what Efrat was saying, of like making a system that you think will work a certain way, or like, you know, I'll like kind of make an attempt at making like a closed loop, like a circular system, and then in some way it always like, you know, or in some unexpected way it works differently, or it fails, or the function of it, there's like a hiccup somewhere, and then I kind of like identify that system in the, like, there's some type of like mirroring that goes on that allows me to kind of understand the failure of the system, or just the kind of like the rogueness of what ended up happening. And, you know, I think that we all kind of like are try to host systems to some extent. But, you know, you can't really like, we're not scientists making experiments, or, I mean, we are, but we're not. I mean, our hand is in it. And I think that like, for me, I'm often surprised at how much my person has intervened with the system that I'm trying to make, that is, you know, that I'm trying to just host. And instead, it ends up like really reflecting my own like function or failures or mishaps.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about that. I think it's sort of related notion of the kind of perspective of the artist versus the perspective of the kind of audience, real or imagined, of work, in all of your bodies of work that are on display for M23. And I was wondering if the process of putting together this digital exhibition had you thinking in any way about the kind of perspective that is offered on work by documentation, or about your own kind of viewing perspective versus the viewing perspective of different audiences who might be viewing your work, or if you were thinking about those questions at all.
I think there's definitely a frustration with showing documentation, especially for sculptors, I think. I mean, for me, the physicality of things is so important that, you know, how much can we really understand and feel the materiality of things and forces at play when you're just watching, looking at photos of these things. And I hope it translates, but I'm such a huge believer in the energy of a room and the movement of material that there's, yeah, it's just, I think it definitely shows an aspect of it, but it's just never the same really. And yeah, I mean, thinking about viewership, the point to me is about making something that speaks so loudly in its experience that you really have to shift something about your body and viewing it. So slow, things I was thinking about for this piece were slowing down and feeling sort of the weight of your feet on the floor and your breath through things, or imagining the connection between your own breath and the movement of air throughout. And so, yeah, I think of this exhibition online as being sort of a showing of remnants in a way. Or a showing of memory or expectation of an experience, but not the actual experience. So I think that's why it needs to have conversations like this and writings and things that sort of mitigate that distance.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that earlier. I think it's there's a lot of potential or possibility in the fact that this exhibition, you think this exhibition and its documentation are the same thing, basically, the way I think about it. I think that's there's that's pretty deep to think about. And also for my work, because of circumstances, that work no longer really exists in a physical way. I think it's this this virtual exhibition was kind of it was a blessing in disguise, I think. Just the experience of setting it up and then just how to present the work in this format in the best way. And I try not to think about what the exhibition would have been like in a physical space, because it didn't happen and it never will, and I think it's really cool also. It was I'm really I got, we all got drug into this virtual world, and I was I didn't like that before, but I think it's really cool in thinking about sculpture. When I was teaching the kids at the Yale Museum, the Yale Art Gallery, and I always had to remind them, you guys, there is an infinite number of perspectives and ways to view a sculpture. I tell them to move around it, look at it from up high, down low, and everything. And I think it's cool that with this virtual format, there's a basically infinite number of ways to see our show. People are watching it on all kinds of different devices and different lighting conditions and different locations, different on every little screen, because the way you use it is unique. So I think that's kind of cool. It's viewed kind of in the same way a sculpture would be in real life, I think.
It's changed. I wasn't terribly excited about this online exhibition when it started. And I feel that very few people are really arguing that art can thrive to its full capacity, like as an online exhibition of documentation, I think, you know, the majority of artists and audiences feel that they get a lot more from the experience of work in space. And, you know, isn't like a hard rule for everyone, but I don't go to online exhibitions. So I was like, well, why would somebody go to mine? But then people contact you and they experience your work in a new way and they want to learn more. So it's, in a way, I'm like pessimistic, but I also have like, people have reached out that have seen the exhibition and it felt like I put my resume into the world, but I didn't feel like I put an exhibition up. It didn't, like, I was even wondering, like, is this like considered a group exhibition? Yeah, it'll change and people will experience work differently. And I wish my work was as effective as like a book that I can hold in my lap at home. But it often requires a lot of space and resources and people. And sometimes that really bums me out. And I wish I could just exist on the internet, but I think for most of us, that doesn't fully work. And that's not really how we've prepared and moved towards all of this. It's more than just images. I mean, that's especially in our program, you know, there's not really a common denominator that unifies our class in this group. You know, it's loosely, Yale wants to put us between painting, sculpture, and photography, but in the contemporary art world, like how many people are just making sculpture, just making painting, like it's much more medium fluid. So, but I will say that a thread between all the people that I went to school with is that it really exists in space, and only photographs can only communicate and convey so much of that experience of work in space.
Yeah, on that point of space and embodiment, I was thinking about how in all of your work, it seems to me that space is very conceptually and also formally important, and that you all in different ways and to different degrees use space, be it like negative space or air, as a kind of medium. And I was curious if you had thoughts on the way in which space functions in your work, and kind of what is visible or invisible, because space is often something we think about not being there, even when its importance is. I think in some of your work, like, and I'm thinking of in Peyton's work, how the air activates the form of the sculpture and makes the air that would otherwise be invisible become visible, and we become aware of it because of that activation. But I would be curious to hear from all of you about kind of how you're thinking about space, and maybe some of the things about your work that might be felt or seen in a physical space that aren't online too.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. It was a little bit jumbled, but really, I just wanted to ask about how you're thinking about space. Be it, I mean, in the case of your work, David, it has this double meaning of outer space too. But I'm curious about the sort of the space or air that is in your work, and how you're thinking about it or using it. I mean, David, in your work, I was thinking about the kind of importance of this big expanse, like in Nevada desert, or, you know, other kinds of, you know, physical spaces where you can do a kind of experiment like a rocket launch, because there isn't a density of development, and there's just this big expanse that can be, you know, used in different ways. And yeah, I just was curious if any of you had thoughts on the way space is functioning for you, or how you're kind of trying to manipulate space.
Yeah, like the desert, that's, you know, that's like my favorite place. And yeah, also like it's so beautiful and also like so harsh at the same time. Like it's and it's, yeah, because it's so vast, like that's where they do things like rocket launches. So I mean, I think about that space, but then like also like value, I guess, the remoteness of it. And for like something, again, something like a rocket launch, like the only way they can be viewed is remotely, because it gets so dangerous to be like so close to them. So yeah, like that type of space I think about, which was I think cool for like a virtual show. I mean, for like my work to be presented in a virtual show, because like that's the way most like space activity, I guess, or like rocket launches are seen. You know, they're like always they're always mediated through some way or through some lens. And actually, Black NASA was like, it was a virtual project like from the beginning. And like me coming to Yale and stuff was like the attempt to like make that virtual project, like started on my website like back in 2016, into like a physical, like hardcore, like sculptural object type thing, you know. And then in the end, because of like what happened, it went back to the virtual side, which I think was really, I mean, really like generative, I think, and it'll continue to be, you know. Like I think like that, yeah, that experience of like having like having all the work ready and like so ready to show and like everything, and then like have it like all like taken away and like back in the virtual space, like, but having like gone through that trajectory, I think that was really an interesting experience to have. So but yeah, the rocket still exists, you know. I'm gonna fly that at some point when this is over, you know. So I'll let you guys know.
David, do you feel that like the true, I say that in quotes, experience of the work is the launch? Because you have the kind of the rocket in action, then you have the sort of artifact that gets shown that you show in different ways in the exhibitions, and then there's the documentation of those exhibitions, which is sort of like this third mediation of that thing that happened. Do you have any sort of like hierarchy or like order? Do you see it that way in terms of like the source is or do they all sort of produce feedback for each other?
No, I don't see it in like a hierarchical way. It's, I think like any interaction with Black NASA is like an experience of the work, not just like the rocket launches maybe are like a culmination of like the object maybe. But no, like when I was coming back from New Haven, like I saw this Black lady in the airport wearing a NASA sweatshirt, and I just gave her one of my Black NASA stickers. Like, I saw you and I want to give you this sticker. And that was the experience of the work for her, I think. You know, I do stuff, yeah, stuff like that. Or like, yeah, I mean, I slap my stickers up and people see it. So yeah, I think it's all part of the experience. What's that sound?
What does it sound like?
I didn't want to say cricket, but yeah, that sounds like a cricket.
Oh yeah, I think it's the fireflies and stuff.
Oh, New Haven.
Really loud out there.
Oh, those summer nights.
On White Street.
Do you have thoughts on how you're using space, Efrat? Because I think I was thinking about that a lot while I was looking at your work and the way in which the different components structure space and kind of create different, I don't know if this is just my reading, but it seemed to create different kind of pathways for the body and for lines of vision to move through or around the work. And I was curious to hear how you were thinking about that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something I always sort of come back to in different ways. Something that was interesting for me in the experience of making this work was that things that I thought of as sort of almost ethereal, like those spears like puncturing air upwards in my sketches, they were almost like just barely touching the floor and having this upward trajectory. And then in reality it became so important the way they stand, and they became so structural, both in like their actual like putting them up, but also in the way they just take up space with all of those like wires coming from them. So yeah, I don't know, like there's just something between the way I imagine something to be working or how it could work, and then this space is also about just like a struggle with physics, coming back to David's point maybe, where there's a reality of how things can hold, and how things can stand in a space and stand having viewers go around them and not fall apart, but also exist in this imaginary space. So the sketch is so important in that way. And I think for me, pushing a lot towards that imaginary space and then bringing that into the actual space becomes a really important thing. So yeah, so imagining like some sort of weight and how the body moves through that or around that, or some sort of cavity and how the body would like imagine itself around that, and then having the reality of that are like really important, I don't know, points of both making and experiencing the work. Yeah, just going back to like the idea of like its physicality and imagined trajectories. So it's so grounded in where it is. But it also goes somewhere else.
This is maybe overly reductive, but I really I envy musicians and painters. I don't produce music and I don't paint, but many of the musicians and painters I know can like work out of a very small space and can do a lot more work and be a lot more productive from home. And when this all happened, I became very aware of the space requirements of just like the work in which it needs to exist in the world for an audience and for myself making it. And there's a frustration and struggle with that sometimes. I think about like the expression, like if somebody had like social anxiety and they said like, I feel that I'm just taking up space, you know, or like there is this kind of like frustration I have with work taking up space despite its necessity. Like there's almost a resentment towards it sometimes in my own work.
Oh yeah, I mean, I know, like, I think like this is like now more than ever, you know, you need to be like really adaptable, I think, and like the way that sculpture has been practiced and kind of like ingrained in like this hardcore like making, like using materials and using space, all those things, like it needs to change, you know. Yeah, like I don't have that. I mean, I don't like it's been a blessing, you know, this summer to be able to just like play at full volume like all the time. Like I'm not gonna have that space like all the time. So like that's something like I have to think about, like how am I gonna like remain agile and continue my practice even when like my resources change, you know, like the space I have changes.
I think about that Andrea Fraser essay, like, why does Fred Sandbeck sculpture make me cry? And like, my interpretation of that essay is like, Fred Sandbeck is like everything as like Andrea Fraser, institutional critique artist, like has spent her career critiquing in the arts of like all of the privilege, hierarchy, and power behind like a modern artist such as this. And then like, here I am, like, just like weeping hysterically in front of like these 3 strings running through like this giant like white museum room. And so there is like this feeling like I want to be adaptive, and in many ways that I'm finding that now. But I also love, you know, there's like I found myself in those things that like the big experience of like space, and like a Dia beacon might be like a very antiquated model for like in which work can exist, but those are also things that really drew me to doing what I'm doing now. And this experience of like art and space with like a great awareness.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe in this time where we're all living in these little Zoom boxes and occupying what seems like mostly digital space more than physical space, there is something newly exciting about sculpture that is actually in a space that you have to go and see. I mean, which is not what's happening perhaps in this exhibition, but I think looking at the documentation, it does make me long for, in many cases, you know, seeing this work in its physical form. And I think there is some way in which, after, you know, a few months of being mostly indoors and not being able to see, go to museums or galleries or see art in the way that we normally would, there's something really appealing and tantalizing about the space of an exhibition, which is the space that's like, you know, non-essential and off limits to us right now. But yeah, like, what does it mean to claim space and to take up space?
I'm also thinking about, Payne, I don't remember how you brought this up, but sorry, motorcycle outside my window. Is that you, David?
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, I was thinking about Payne bringing up digestion, and Payne would talk about digestion in different ways throughout our time at Yale. But I'm in connection to this, I'm thinking about like digesting a space in our own practice. So like in claiming is like one way to put it, but I think also thinking about the studios we had in that space, like vast space to create in, and the galleries and our, like the spaces we were inhabiting at Yale. I'm just wondering like how that came into our imagination, or really like came into our body and our experiences, and in ways that sometimes I think were freeing and sometimes were, I don't know, we were resisting. And I wonder, like, now being in whatever spaces we are, how that still plays into what we're doing and into our imagination. And then I think about like Peyton's work and wanting to like digest through the space, or the space to be to function in that way. Yeah, I don't know if you wanted to talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like when we were talking about things that can't quite be captured, like with the documentation or with the online thing, is like obviously the piece that I made, this piece, and then the piece that I made like a year ago, both are very like colorful and bright, and so they seem very like loud and buoyant and present and bold. And like, but in reality, like in person, there were many moments, maybe more moments of the thing deflating and shrinking and that space collapsing than there were of like the robust, like, you know, active points. And like, I think about like the patheticness of like seeing something that in one moment is so great and so like, just like absolutely filled. And then, you know, there's an abrupt pause in sound, and then like kind of allowing that space to like collapse, and suddenly there's more room for your own voice and your own body, and like, you know, that kind of like just the way that it goes away, or like, and then when you're in it, you know, like I had gotten in a piece that was similar to this piece, which I'm doing soon in September. But when you're in it, like when the space is collapsing, like that's actually when it's harder to move. And then when it's loud and there's more air, it's very easy to move. And oh, sorry, motorcycle. And what was I saying? I lost my train of thought. Yeah, space.
Peyton, can I, one of like the early observations I made on this kind of evolving series that you've done with the, what are we calling it now? The tube? What is it?
Tube is good.
So with the tube, this like, these fans that oscillate on and off in this like undulating tube that you are navigating inside of and performing inside of, it's both like very physical and tied to space, but I have seen you also like travel with this. Like you're almost like a magician with like a suitcase full of like, for like such a big sprawling installation. Like I was like, this is genius in that like it literally can fit in the trunk of like a sedan, and then also like actually interrupt, disrupt, and consume such like large architecture and space, interior, exterior, which is like both specific and like highly adaptable.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable how tiny, like how much it can fold up, and how I can fit like a sculpture that can be like too big for a room that I try to put it into like literally a backpack, and walk in and then like unfold it. I'm like, oh, it's too big. I mean that, yeah, it's, yeah. And then, you know, it makes me think about like the sizeless space, or like, I mean, even just like air, I catch myself when somebody asks you about like, oh, like you make, like you're an artist, like what kind of work do you make? I catch myself in moments where you don't really want to get into it. I caught myself saying like, oh, I make work with air. And air is like so vague and so open and so nothing, that it's like the perfect word to like kind of like side slip having to explain something to someone that probably doesn't care. But it's also like open enough to like, if somebody actually, like there's a lot of questions that can lead into a wide space of conversation.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Well, I think we're nearing the end of our time and we should probably wrap up, but kind of in closing, I just wanted to see if anyone wanted to plug any upcoming projects or talk about any last kind of thoughts, anything that you wanted to mention. But yeah, I mean, of course, like Peyton was saying, this is the time when it's finally acceptable to not know what's happening or coming next, because no one does. But yeah, just if anyone wants to end with a closing plug of any kind.
Well, I just think like this situation proves that like art will prevail no matter what. Like artists are gonna keep making art and keep showing art no matter what. And I just hope that like right now, like art can just bring some peace to the world and some positive energy for people. They need it right now.
Yeah, I don't have anything to plug, but something I sort of was thinking in this last conversation, just about how like how our things travel physically and how they travel sort of mentally. And I'm really curious to see how, I don't know, for David, like moving his things almost become like a mission for Black NASA, or that's my read of it at least. And I feel like that's super an interesting space where it's something that's literally like moving throughout the country makes like some sort of change wherever it stops. And yeah, and I think just thinking about things leaving the space in which they were created and taking new forms. I'm just really curious to see how that can happen for me and how that can happen for all of us. And I feel like that's going to take different forms for each one of us, with like whatever possibilities will come up.
You say like moving my stuff was a Black NASA mission?
That's my read of it. Is that wrong?
Moving from New Haven to Los Angeles? No, that's just moving.
I know.
I don't know what that is.
David, can I challenge that though? Because you did photograph the move, and I feel it was very much about your kind of migration with this work. I'm kind of wondering where some of the photographs. I guess this is not this goes beyond the closing. I'm not challenging or saying that you're wrong. I'm wondering how that work then is understood for you when you were documenting this transition and placing the work in the different kind of contexts across America.
Yeah, I think it was just like searching for like different scenes, because like I didn't photograph like every single thing. It wasn't like a travel log or like some like documentary of my trip. You know, it's just like I happened to be passing through this landscape on my way back home, and I find scenes that like resonate with me, and like I felt like I wanted to take that picture. So I mean, I think like the travel, like migration aspect of it is kind of secondary to that.
Yeah, I definitely hear that. I just think there's something about the way things inhabit space, and thinking specifically about the way your rocket inhabited space in those photos is such a strong image that really stayed with me. So just in that sense, that was my read of it.
Okay, cool.
Did you have any closing thoughts or things you wanted to say before we come to an end? No?
No. Let things continue to get weird and stay with the trouble. And yeah, I don't know. This is a time for a lot of healing, and I'm drawn to the things that don't quite fit into easy categories, and I think there's a lot of that now. So I think anything could happen now. I see potential. Everything is just beginning. It's not just ending.
Yeah, with that, I've certainly learned to soften my expectations of this year and this fall and every day and myself. And I will be performing on September 2nd through M23. I think we'll be closing out the show soon after that. So, yeah.
That's perfect. We end with a plug. Well, thank you all so much for talking and letting me think with you about your work. It was really exciting. And thank you to M23 for facilitating this exhibition.